control 20 minutes in opposition. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Mrs. Granger.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the measure under consideration.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of this short-term continuing resolution. This bill extends government funding until March 8th for 4 bills and March 22nd for others. Given the differences between this year's House and Senate bills, we knew finding common ground would not be easy. But we've made progress, and we need a few more weeks to finish drafting the bills. We also need to give members adequate time to review them. In the meantime, we can't afford a harmful government shutdown. I urge my colleagues to support this CR, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, here we are again, kicking the can down the road and for other purposes. Buying more time so that we can spend more money that we don't have at a time when we are going to eclipse more spending on interest than our national defense this year. And by 2026, we're going to be spending $1 trillion on interest. We're going to continue to spend monies at the Nancy Pelosi spending level of an omnibus bill that Republicans roundly oppose. That is what is happening on the floor of the United States House right now. We are going to continue funding this government at Nancy Pelosi's omnibus spending level. That is a level that will continue, by the way, to fund all of the priorities we oppose. We're going to continue to fund the open borders that led to the death of Americans. We're going to continue to fund the United Nations at $12.5 billion that is undermining our freedom, working against us to move people illegally into the United States. We're going to fund UNRWA, which is funding Hamas, an enemy of Israel. We're going to fund the IRS that's targeting Americans. We're going to fund the Department of Justice that is targeting former President Trump. We are going to do that today, here on the floor of the House of Representatives, rather than exercising the power of the purse that James Madison articulated in Federalist 58, that this body is supposed to check an out-of-control executive branch. That is what is happening today, and we should oppose it. And I would yield such time as the gentleman shall consume to the gentleman from Florida.
Gentleman is recognized.
Watching House Republicans is like watching a football team whose best play is the punt and the block. Now, I've tried to throw a few Hail Marys along the way, and I'm glad that we blocked the bad Langford amnesty bill, but we punted on needed FISA reforms. We blocked the McConnell supplemental for now, but we punt yet again on needed spending cuts. We blocked additional aid and additional U.S. involvement in this war in Ukraine, and indeed we punted Kevin McCarthy, who authorized $115 billion to Ukraine. But here we gather to punt yet again. Last I checked, the Republicans actually have a majority in the House of Representatives, but you wouldn't know it if you looked at our checkbook, because we are all too willing to continue the policy choices of Joe Biden and the spending levels of Nancy Pelosi instead of showing the will and the courage to say that this woke and weaponized government has to be defanged. It has to be attacked. It has to see reductions in spending. And while many Americans have lived most of their lives not actually paying a price for the national debt because we are $34 trillion in debt, because we are on our way to $50 trillion in debt, the Americans who work hard all over this country are seeing higher gas prices, higher grocery prices, higher interest rates, and all we seem to offer is low energy and low T in the face of those mounting challenges. We ought to be rejecting this CR. We ought to pass single subject spending bills, and we ought to vote for the spending cuts that this country desperately needs. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from Connecticut, Ranking Member DeLauro, for 5 minutes.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this continuing resolution, which will provide us with the short time that's needed to fully conclude the 2024 appropriations process. The continuing resolution keeps the government open while the appropriations committees in the House and the Senate finalize the 2024 funding bills that are in line with the agreement that has been the law since last June, reaffirmed in the top lines agreed to by Leader Schumer and Speaker Johnson earlier this year. While at the time of passing our last continuing resolution, I had hoped that we would not need this measure. You know, we owe it to the American people to do our due diligence in reaching the end of this process. I appreciate the respectful bipartisan cooperation that took place to put forward this continuing resolution and move us closer to the finish line. There is now a shared understanding that the ultimate conclusion to the saga of 2024 funding will be in the appropriations bills that earn the support of Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate, bills that will likely need to pass under suspension of the rules, like the bill we are considering today. In addition to passing the 12 appropriations bills, Congress still must respond to President Biden's request for our urgent national security needs. There is no time to waste. We must quickly provide support for Ukraine in their fight against Russian tyranny. We must provide support for our Indo-Pacific and Middle East allies. And crucially, we cannot wait any longer to provide humanitarian aid for the civilians caught in the crossfire of these conflicts. Without the swift action, the legacy of this Congress will be the destruction of Ukraine, the appeasement of a dictator, and the abandonment of starving children and ailing families. We must come to a bipartisan compromise and show the American people that Congress is still able to address urgent needs, show the world that America is still unwavering as a defender of democracy wherever it is being fought for. Congress must avoid a shutdown. We must enact full-year spending bills and emergency assistance for our national security and deliver for the American people as soon as possible. To those ends, let this be our last continuing resolution. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank the Speaker. The gentlelady, it's important to note, voted against the FRA last year because, specifically noted in the gentlelady's press release, the side deals that are being put in place in this exercise that we're going to be putting forward next week in appropriations bills, those side deals were not in the law that the gentlelady just referred to. To be very clear, everyone's going to go around talking about following the deal that was cut last year under the FRA, that we're spending at a certain level. The fact is another $70 billion was added in side deals, and that's why the gentlelady opposed the FRA last year. But those side deals are a part of this agreement that is plussing up and funding the bureaucracy that is at war with the American people. That is the truth. That is the truth, no matter how much people want to gloss over it on either side of the aisle, but particularly this side of the aisle. Because this side of the aisle wants to be able to campaign on border security. And you know what? The border's not secure. And we're going to be passing a continuing resolution that continues to fund a DHS that refuses to secure the border. These Americans are dead. These Americans are dead because illegal immigrants, illegal aliens were released into the United States by this administration. Laken Riley, 1 week ago today, was alive and well, and now she's gone because somebody from Venezuela was released on mass parole in El Paso, went into the United States, went to New York, was released after assaulting somebody, moved to Athens, Georgia, and killed this young woman because of the policies of the radical progressive Democrats that my colleagues on this side of the aisle want to campaign against, but refuse to use the power of the purse to stop. James Madison gave us the power of the purse, and we should darn well use it. With that, I'm going to yield up to 3 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. And he's exactly right. What is the legislative branch's remedy to an executive branch that refuses to follow the law? It is to remove spending. I introduced legislation that said we'll fund ICE, CBP. We're going to fund TSA. We're going to fund air traffic controllers, and our military personnel. And you know what? We're not going to fund anything else except for mandatories until this administration actually enforces the border. But we can't do that because there's this fear of a shutdown. You explain that to the American people. You explain that to the American people in my community. You go down there and take a look at the National Forest, where there's now a squatters camp set up, filled with people who are flowing across our border. So our leader, who said in November, we're not going to do any more short-term CRs. I had it with him. This is the third one. And you know what happens? We just keep spending money. And we keep the policies that are in place. And that means the border remains open. This country remains in danger because of this administration. But not just this administration, but because this body does not use what the founders gave us as the ultimate tool, and that is the purse strings. It is really shameful. With that, Mr. Chairman, yield back.
Gentleman from Arizona yields back. Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from Tennessee, the chairman of the Energy and Water Subcommittee, Mr. Fleischman, for 3 minutes.
The distinguished gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Madam Chair, I wish to thank Chairman Granger and her outstanding staff, and really all the staff on the majority and minority side and in both houses. Mr. Speaker, our founding fathers gave us a great constitutional republic. And in that regard, each and every one of the members of this chamber stands for election or re-election every 2 years. I represent the people of the great state of Tennessee, East Tennessee, wonderful people, God-fearing people. They love this country. They love our history, and they are just so proud of what we are doing as a nation. I realize that other people in other parts of our country have a different ethos, have different priorities. But we are where we are. The American people gave us a very slim majority in the House, the Senate. The other party has a slim majority, and the White House is controlled by the other party. I want the American people to know, Mr. Speaker, that this negotiation has been difficult. But to close the government down at a time like this would hurt people who should not be hurt. Let me give one example. I chair, as our distinguished chair has said, the Energy and Water Subcommittee of Appropriations. As part of that, funds our great national labs and our Office of Science and so many other great things. But as a part of that, through the NNSA, the National Nuclear Security Administration, it funds our nation's nuclear arsenal. We're in a very dangerous world right now. Our adversaries are ramping up. I wish we were not on the precipice of another arms race, but I'm afraid we are. We can't close that down. We can't shut that down. And so that I can be abundantly clear, government shutdowns, and I have lived through 3, never work. They cause more harm than they do good. They cost more money. They cost the American taxpayer more money because when they revamp and start up again, basically we lose all those person hours and it just causes havoc. This continuing resolution, to be clear, is a process continuing resolution. It's just to allow these 6 bills to next week when we will actually pass a fiscal budget, which I think is the obligation of the House, the Senate, and the White House to do. We will do that. We will do that with the other bills. And I do respect my friends who are very passionate today in opposing this. But the reality is the American people want us to do our work. To do our work well, we've got to keep the government open. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. I would note that the gentleman, for whom I have a great deal of respect, was just using a lot of the arguments that I've heard over and over again And it's something that we've come to understand in this town is what we call the glossary. It's like when you run out of the sort of, what are we actually going to fight over substantively, we just bring out all the terms, right? We talk about, we only have a slim majority. Well, I will remind my colleagues on this side of the aisle, the Democrats had a slim majority when they've jammed through numerous massive bills, whether it's Obamacare, whether we're talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. Yet here we sit, and we're walking away from the majority that we were given to use that majority, to use the power of the purse, to stop an executive branch that is out of control. A continuing resolution will continue to fund Biden's war on our border. And it's not just Biden, it's the radical progressive Democrats as a whole. It's a war on our well-being, a war on our security and safety. That young lady who was killed in Georgia last week, that is happening over and over again in Texas. A young cheerleader that was killed, found in a bathtub by somebody here illegally. A 2-year-old right here in Montgomery County, Maryland, outside of D.C., who was killed by someone here illegally and released. A young person in Louisiana who was raped last week in Louisiana by somebody here illegally from Honduras, released. When are we going to stop it? When is this side of the aisle going to use the power of the purse to stop it? Because I can promise you the radical progressive Democrats want it. They want open borders. We're continuing to fund a weaponized IRS, continuing to fund a weaponized Department of Justice like the DOJ that went after Mark Houck, went after Scott Smith. We're funding an EPA electric vehicle mandate. I heard my colleague talking about energy and water. What are we going to do to preserve American energy? Well, the American people suffer because our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are pursuing unicorn energy policy. EPA rules killing coal and natural gas plants, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, UNRWA, the ATF that is banning pistol braces on our Second Amendment rights, the Department of Education student loan scam, that the President of the United States went to the microphone and applauded, ignoring the United States Supreme Court. What are we going to do? Fund it. We're going to keep funding it. What about the NIH and the FDA and COVID tyranny? What about the Department of Veterans Affairs, the chief diversity officers, the abortion travel fund, taxpayer-funded sex changes, transgender surgeries? Your tax dollars are funding all of that. And we're going to continue it with a continuing resolution to do what? Buy time to cut a deal that will do what? Spend even more money, rack up even more debt to continue these policies at war with the American people. With that, I will yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Colorado.
Gentlelady from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's call a spade a spade. The Uniparty's deal to keep spending taxpayer dollars like drunken sailors is a horrible deal for the American people. It is immoral and unsustainable to continue the reckless spending in Washington, D.C. This debt is going to our children and our children's children. And the American people elected a majority that promised to cut spending and cut this out of control spending from Washington, D.C., and put an end to the Biden regime's policies that are destroying America. This bill does the opposite of what we, the majority, promised the American people. Voting for this bill is voting to fund Joe Biden's wide-open border policies that killed 22-year-old Lincoln Riley last Thursday. You know, crime in Venezuela sure is going down, and that's because they are all coming through our wide-open borders. Criminal, illegal aliens coming through. And voting for this bill is voting to enable the cartel who have operational control of our southern border to continue the flow of fentanyl into our communities that is killing our children and our families, our loved ones. They are a foreign terrorist organization, and they are guilty of narco-terrorism. And we need to execute our military's ability to stop them. And instead, we're funding these policies to continue. Voting for this bill is voting to continue Nancy Pelosi's spending, taxpayer-funded abortions, and Green New Deal policies. Everything we campaigned against, we won this majority on. And now we are going completely against it. We need to govern as we campaign and do what we promise the American people that we will do. That's why I have led to impeach Joe Biden for his dereliction of duty to secure the southern border. And now we must use the power of the purse and not fund a government that is allowing this against its people. I am voting no on this continuing resolution, and I urge you all to do the same. I yield back.
Reserve.
Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities. Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 2 minutes.
Gentlelady from Texas recognized for 2 minutes.
331 million Americans. Thank you, Chairwoman Granger and Ranking Member DeLauro. Those Americans are depending on us to save their lives. If we do not vote today, we will cause the loss of life. We did not vote for the supplemental that the President sent over almost a year ago to deal with the southern border, and lives have been lost. But as a Texan, I will not accept your challenge that I want people to die. Absolutely not. And that this constitutional right of the power of the purse is one that I have used recklessly. They have used it responsibly, and the budget numbers of whether it's Nancy Pelosi or the negotiators are responsible for helping the 331 million Americans. In my state, your state, you will not pay 172,000 active duty soldiers when we don't pass this today. The Small Business Administration will stop handling $2 billion in loans. There will be no reentry programs for those who are trying to get their life straight. We will eliminate the funding for our public schools, the Department of Education, in things like early education and the feeding program. We will stop 176,000 people from flying through airports because you will not be able to fund aspects of Homeland Security. 786,000 people would lose their access to the Women and Infant Program, which I understand is one of those that are being attacked. You are causing the loss of life. And I will not stand here and accept that challenge. You are my friends. We work together, but your arguments are false. The responsibility of the power of the purse is to be responsible. And so 168,000 federal workers who do vital work will be lost if we do not proceed. It is important that food and drug is able to be funded, that housing is able to be funded, that the Department of Agriculture is able to be funded. Let me say, Mr. Speaker, as I close, we must be responsible. 331 million people want us to fight for them, and we're going to win this fight and pass this and avoid a government shutdown. I yield back. Thank you.
Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. Gentlelady from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Well, respecting my friend from Texas, I would say, where were my Democratic colleagues when we were passing H.R. 2, which would actually do the job of securing the border? So it is hard for me to take seriously the claims that my Democratic colleagues, all radical progressives, want to actually secure the border and don't have complete ownership of the fact that Laken Riley was killed by a Venezuelan let out by this administration under abuse of parole, which H.R. 2 would fix. It would have fixed it. And my Democratic colleagues were nowhere to be found. This body, this side of the aisle, did their job in passing a strong border security measure. We have legislation on the floor that did the job, but we had no support from our Democratic colleagues because it would have worked. So my colleagues on the other side of the building in the Senate passed legislation in the Senate that would not do the job and now want to hide behind that. That's the actual truth. And with that, I will yield up to 3 minutes to my good friend from Kentucky, Mr. Massey.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 3 minutes.
I want to give the American people an overview of the debate that's happening here today. Why are there 3 members of Congress controlling time on the floor? I thought there were only 2 parties. Nope. When it comes to spending, there's the uniparty. There is only one party. So today, that is because Republicans and Democrats have united to kick the can down the road. They wanted to control all time for debate today, but my colleague, Mr. Roy from Texas, came down here and used a parliamentary procedure so that the people who take their oath to the Constitution most seriously, the people who are most concerned about debt, the people who want to represent the good folks back home, have a voice here today because of my colleague Chip Roy, who's claimed 20 minutes in opposition. And what are we doing here today? Well, we're going to pass a CR. We're going to kick the can down the road. Is that going to solve any problems? No, it creates another crisis next week. You see, that's what they want, another crisis. They want to threaten you with the shutdown so they can get more spending. But is this a clean CR? We're told you can't add anything to it? No, it deals with student aid in this CR. Do the American people, are they concerned about student aid right now? Is that the most pressing issue to address in this spending bill? We have a crisis at the southern border. We could add one sentence to this bill that would help tremendously. Just say none of the funds hereby appropriated may be used to disassemble border security erected by the states on our border. Put that one sentence in this continuing resolution. That would help tremendously. I am worried that we're not going to prevail today, the third group who is debating here against the uniparty. And if the other side prevails, what will happen? What will happen today, this evening, after this passes? Will we stay here and work hard for another week to get the 12 bills done, the 12 separate appropriations bills? No. Guess what we're going to do this evening? Everybody's already got their plane tickets. They're sending us home early. Congratulations. You moved the crisis down another week. Go home. Have a 4-day weekend. We're going to let staff and a few members in the Senate and a few members in the House write this big bill, and then you can take it or leave it next week. Gone is any semblance of regular order from this process. What we have is what the swamp always does. And I urge my colleagues to oppose this continuing resolution that does nothing but kick the can down the road. And I yield back to my colleague from Texas.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I yield up to 2 minutes, my friend from Virginia.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I stand here today again opposing the status quo of more reckless spending in Washington. This House is supposedly run by Republicans, and yet here we are continuing to pass the Pelosi, Biden, Schumer spending levels and the policies connected to them, predictably with a majority of Democrat votes. As a matter of fact, this morning, I had a Democrat member tell me in a private conversation he likes it when we're in charge because nothing changes, but we get the blame for it because we have the majority. Our national debt continues to skyrocket. We're at nearly $35 trillion. That's a number that's hard to grasp. It's actually more than $100,000 per citizen, and that figure just grows by the day. Bidenflation is further exacerbating the crisis, and the congressional uniparty is perpetuating it on a daily basis. Thankfully, we may be getting some future relief with the just announced resignation of the Democrat minority leader in the Senate, but some of us here in the House, we came here to actually represent the American people, to do what we said we would do, and we did not mean constantly kicking the can down the road, passing more continuing resolutions that hurt the American people. Many people in this body are scared of a government shutdown. And I will acknowledge the government shutdown is not the ideal thing, but it's not the worst thing. The worst thing is keeping in place the Biden, Pelosi, Schumer policies that are destroying the country and bankrupting our kids and our grandkids. Worse yet, they're keeping in place the border invasion, the very invasion that we campaign against, the very invasion that is the greatest threat to our country. But that's what's going to happen here today. We're going to fund that border invasion for another week as a bridge to another spending bill that will keep all the policies in place and actually increase them over the Pelosi-Schumer levels from back before we had the majority. We could have passed a full-year stopgap spending bill that would have cut $100 billion. We could have attached to it border security to stand up for the American people. As a bonus, that would eliminate thousands of earmarks for tens of billions of dollars more. But here we are today. True leadership involves making difficult decisions. Cutting spend is difficult. That's why nobody does it here. But when will the debt matter in this chamber beyond a campaign talking point? I urge no, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to my friend from Alabama.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 1 minute.
Prolong the out-of-control spending by the Biden and Pelosi that fuels our 17.9% inflation rate. This legislation provides no funding for President Trump's border wall. More than 600,000 illegal alien criminals and 300 on the terrorist watch list have entered our open southern border under Biden, and there is no doubt that American families are in danger. Just this week in Alabama, 2 illegal aliens were arrested as part of a child trafficking sex ring. Last week in Georgia, a young girl with a bright future ahead of her was murdered by an illegal alien. The list of tragedies is growing, and it's past time to do something about it. I signed the Immigration Accountability Project pledge to oppose all government funding until the action is taken to secure our southern border. Instead of kicking the can down the road with another CR, the number one priority of this Congress should be funding Trump's wall and defunding this invasion. We must fund President Trump's wall and defund Biden's backdoor contributions to organizations that are sending illegals to a city near you. It should not take more than one tragedy for a border to become priority. It is time to finish Trump's wall, protect Americans, and with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Texas reserved. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I yield 1 minute to my friend from Missouri.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you to my good friend from Texas, Mr. Roy. Well, America, here we go again. Today, the House is set to extend the bloated and inflationary spending levels that have left our country $34 trillion in debt and fuels a government that is at war with the American people. This is now the 4th time that we've kicked the can down the road since just last September. It's now the 4th time that we've shrugged our shoulders and said, sorry, America, we just don't have the fight in us this time, but we'll try again next time. We all promised we wouldn't do this crap when we got up here. The American people have demanded responsible spending and border security for years, but we failed them. When will we heed the calls of our constituents to rein in the wasteful spending, secure the borders, and defeat the bureaucracy targeting them? You know, the last line of the Declaration of Independence has a bold and courageous statement by the people who signed it. They said, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Sadly, we're not serving with those people today with the same resolve. I urge my colleagues to vote against this CR.
Gentleman from Texas reserved. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Texas reserved. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Can I inquire how much time we have left?
Gentleman from Texas has 1 minute. Gentlelady from Texas has 11 and a half minutes.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Texas reserved. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Texas has the right to reserve to close. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I'm prepared to close.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
To my colleagues on either side of the aisle, we have a fundamental responsibility under the Constitution of the United States to use the power of the purse to check an executive branch that is not following the law. It is not enough to impeach, send to the Senate, sit back and grab the popcorn and watch. We have a duty to actually defund tyranny and lawlessness. That is precisely what the founders said. It is what the founders wrote into the Federalist Papers. It is what they contemplated in Article 1 in the Constitution. And do not go out and have talking points about dead Americans because of what this administration is doing, letting people into this country to kill Americans like Lake and Riley last week, and then write the check that funds their broken policies. I yield back.
It's back. The remainder of his time. The gentlelady from Texas is recognized to close.
Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Bill H.R. 7463? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose, the gentleman from Texas? Seek recognition.
I demand the yeas and nays.
Sorry. I'm sorry. A lady from Texas demands the yeas and nays. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Proceedings will resume on questions previously postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order. Motion to suspend the rules and pass the following bills: H.R. 7102, H.R. 7463, and H.R. 7454. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, remaining electronic votes will be conducted as a 5-minute votes. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Williams, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1102, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title. H.R. 7102.
H.R. 7102, a bill to establish an Office of Native American Affairs within the Small Business Administration and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 402 and the nays are 16. With two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Granger, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 7463. On which the yeas and nays are ordered, the clerk will report the title.
H.R. 7463, a bill making further continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2024 and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. Have all members. On this vote, the yeas are 320, the nays are 99. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Graves, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 7454, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 7454, a bill to amend Title 49 United States Code to extend authorizations for the Airport Improvement Program, to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, to extend the funding and expenditure authority of the Airport and Airway Trust Fund, and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.